Hello, everybody. Hope you're having a good season. Christmas around the corner. I thought I would do something. I would read the Christmas Carol through the weeks up until Christmas. I'll put it on Facebook and you can be happy to follow along if you'd like. So let's get started. To begin with, Old Marley was as dead as a doornail. Scrooge and he were partners for I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole friend and sole mourner that day. And even Scrooge was not so dreadfully cut up by the event of Marley's death. But that he was an excellent man of business, that very day of the funeral, Scrooge managed to get a bargain for his friend's funeral. There is no doubt that Marley was dead. This must be distinctly understood, or nothing wonderful can come of the story I am about to relate to you. Scrooge never painted old Marley's name off the sign. There it stood for years afterwards, above the warehouse door, Scrooge and Marley. The firm was known as Scrooge and Marley. Sometimes people who were new to the business called Scrooge Scrooge. Other times they called him Marley. But he answered to both names. It was all the same to him, business. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone. Scrooge? A squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner was he. Hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire. Secret and self-contained and solitary as an oyster, the cold within him froze all his features and nipped his pointed nose, shriveled his cheek, stiffened his gait as he walked. It made his eyes look red. His thin lips were blue, and he spoke out shrewdly in his grating voice. Bah, humbug! A frosty rime was on his head, and on his eyebrows and his wiry chin. He carried his own low temperature always about with him. He iced his office in the dog days of summer and didn't thaw it 1 degree at Christmas time. External heat and cold had little influence on Scrooge. No warmth could warm, nor wintry weather chill him. No wind that blew was bitter than he. No falling snow was more intent upon its purpose. No pelting rain less open to entreaty. Foul weather didn't know where to have him. Nobody ever stopped him in the street to say, with gladsome looks, "Why, dear Scrooge, how are you? When will you come to see me?" No beggars implored him to bestow a trifle. No children asked him what time it was. No man or woman ever once in all his life inquired the way to such and such a place of Scrooge. Even the blind man's dogs appeared to know him, and when they saw him coming down the alley, they would tug their owners into doorways and up courtyards, and then they would wag their tails through, though they said to their owners, "No eye at all is better than an evil eye, Dock Master." But what did Scrooge care? It was the very thing he liked, to edge his way along the crowded paths of life, warning all human sympathy to keep its distance. Once upon a time, of all good days in the year, on Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. It was cold and bleak and biting weather, foggy withal, and he could hear the people in the court outside go wheezing up and down, beating their hands upon their breasts and stamping their feet upon the pavement stones to warm themselves. The city clocks all just gone 3, but it was quite dark already. It had not been light all day, and the candles were flaring in the windows of the neighboring offices like ruddy smears upon the papal brown air. The fog came pouring in at every chink and keyhole, and was so dense without that although the court was of the narrowest, the houses opposite were mere phantoms. The door of Scrooge's counting house was open, that he might keep an eye upon his clerk, who in his dismal little cell beyond a sort of tank was copying letters. Scrooge had a very small fire, but the clerk's fire was so very much smaller that it looked like one coal burning. But he couldn't replenish it, for Scrooge kept the coal box in his own room. And so surely as the clerk came in with the shovel, the master predicted that it would be necessary for them to part. Wherefore the clerk put on his white comforter and tried to warm himself at the candle, in which effort, not being a man of a strong imagination, he failed. Suddenly, "A Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you!" cried a cheerful voice. It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, who came upon him so quickly. This was the first intimation he had of his approach. "Bah!" said Scrooge. "Humbug!" He had so heated himself with rapid walking in the fog and frost, this nephew of Scrooge's, that he was all in a glow. His face was ruddy and handsome, his eyes sparkled with Christmas cheer, and his breath smoked from the cold air. "Christmas a humbug, Uncle?" said Scrooge's nephew. "You don't mean that, I am sure." "I do," said Scrooge. "Merry Christmas! What right have you be to merry? You're poor enough." "Come then," returned the nephew gaily. "What right do you to be dismal? You're rich enough." "Bah! Humbug!" "Don't be cross, Uncle," said the nephew. "What else can I be?" returned the uncle, "when I live in such a world of fools as this? Merry Christmas! What's Christmas time but a time for paying bills without money? A time for finding yourselves a year older and not 1 hour richer." "If I could work my will," said Scrooge indignantly, "every idiot who goes about with a Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. He should." "Uncle," pleaded the nephew. "Nephew," returned the uncle sternly, "keep Christmas in your own way, and let me keep it in mine." "Keep it," repeated Scrooge's nephew, "but you don't keep it." Let me leave it alone, then," said Scrooge. "Much good may it do you. Much good has it ever done you. But I have always thought of Christmas time as a good time, Uncle. A kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time. The only time I know of in the long calendar of the year when men and women seem by one consent to open their shut up hearts freely and to think of people below them as they really were fellow passengers to the grave, and not another race of creatures bound on other journeys. And therefore, Uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe it has done me good, and I will and will do me good. And so I say, God bless it." The clerk in the tank involuntarily applauded, becoming immediately sensible of the impropriety. He poked the fire and extinguished the last frail spark for the very last coal. "Let me hear another sound from you," said Scrooge to his apprentice, "and you'll keep Christmas by losing your situation." "You're quite a powerful speaker, sir," he added, turning to his nephew. "I wonder you don't go into Parliament." "Don't be angry, Uncle. Come, dine with us tomorrow." "But why?" cried Scrooge's nephew. "Why? Why did you get married?" said Scrooge. "Because I fell in love, Uncle." "Because you fell in love," growled Scrooge, as if that were the only one thing in the world more ridiculous than a Merry Christmas. "Good afternoon, sir." "Nay, Uncle, but you never came to see me before that happened. Why give it as a reason for not coming now?" "Good afternoon," said Scrooge. "I want nothing from you, Uncle. I ask nothing of you. Why cannot we be friends?" "Good afternoon," said Scrooge. "We have never had any quarrel, to which I have been a party, but I have made the trial in homage to Christmas, and I'll keep my Christmas humor to the last. So a Merry Christmas, Uncle." "Good afternoon," Scrooge said. "And a Happy New Year, Uncle." "Good afternoon," Scrooge said. His nephew left the room without an angry word, notwithstanding. He stopped at the outdoor door to bestow the greetings of the season on the clerk, who, cold as he was warmer than Scrooge, for he returned that cordially goodbye. "There's another fellow," muttered Scrooge, who overheard him. "My clerk with 15 shillings a week, and a wife and a family, talking about a Merry Christmas. I'll retire to Bedlam." The clerk, in letting Scrooge's nephew out, had let 2 other people in. They were portly gentlemen, pleasant to behold, and now stood there, with their hats off, in Scrooge's office. They had books and papers in their hands and bowed to him. "Good day, sir." "Scrooge and Marley's, I believe," said one of the gentlemen, referring to the sign. "Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley?" "Mr. Marley has been dead these 7 years," Scrooge replied. "He died 7 years ago, this very night." "We have no doubt his liberality is well represented by his surviving partner," said the gentleman, presenting his credentials. It certainly was, for they had been 2 kindred spirits. At the ominous word liberality, Scrooge frowned and shook his head and handed the credentials back to them. "At this festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge," said the gentleman, taking up a pen, "it is more than unusually desirable that we should make some slight provisions for the poor and the destitute, who suffer greatly at the present time. Many thousands are in want of common necessities. Hundreds of thousands are in want of common comfort, sir."
"Are there no prisons?"
asked Scrooge. "There are plenty of prisons, sir," the gentleman said, laying down his pen again.
"And the union workhouses?"
demanded Scrooge.
"Are they still in operation?"
"They are, sir, still," returned the gentleman. "I wish I could say they were not."
"The treadmill and the poor law are in full vigor, then?"
said Scrooge. Both of them are very busy, sir."
"Oh, I was afraid, from what you said at first, that something had occurred to stop them in their usual course," said Scrooge. "I'm very glad to hear that the workhouses and the prisons are still working."
"Under the impression that they scarcely furnish Christian cheer of mind or body to the multitude," returned the gentleman, "a few of us are endeavoring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink and means of warmth during the Christmas season. We chose this time because it is a time of all others when want is keenly felt and abundance rejoices. What shall I put you down for, Mr. Scrooge?"
"Nothing,"
Scrooge replied. "Oh, you wish to be anonymous, then?"
"I wish to be left alone,"
said Scrooge. "Since you ask me what I wish, gentlemen, that is my answer. I don't make merry myself at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry. I help to support the establishments I have mentioned.
The jail and the workhouses. They cost enough, and those who are badly off must go there."
"Many can't go there, and many would rather die, Mr. Scrooge."
"If they would rather die," said Scrooge, "then they had better do it, and decrease the surplus population. Besides, excuse me, I don't know that."
"You might know it," observed one of the gentlemen.
"It's not my business," Scrooge returned. "It's enough for a man to understand his own business and not to interfere with other people's. Mine occupies me constantly. Good afternoon, gentlemen."
Seeing clearly that it would be useless to pursue their point, the gentleman withdrew. Scrooge resumed his labors with an improved opinion of himself. Meanwhile, a boy stooped down at Scrooge's keyhole to regale him with a Christmas carol. But at the first sound, "God bless ye, merry gentlemen, may nothing you dismay," Scrooge seized the ruler from his desk with such an energy of action that the singer fled in terror, leaving the keyhole to the fog. At length the hour of shutting up the counting-house arrived. With an ill will, Scrooge dismounted from his stool and tactfully admitted the fact to the expectant clerk in the tank, who instantly snuffed his candle out and put on his hat.
"You'll want all day tomorrow, I suppose," said Scrooge.
"If quite convenient, sir."
"It's not convenient," said Scrooge, "and it's not fair. If I was to stop half a crown for it, You'd think yourself ill-used, I'll be bound."
The clerk smiled faintly.
"And yet," said Scrooge, "you don't think me ill-used when I pay a day's wages of work for no work."
The clerk observed that it was only once a year.
"A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December,"
said Scrooge, buttoning his great coat to the chin.
"But I suppose you must have the whole day. Be here all the earlier the next morning."
The clerk promised that he would, and Scrooge walked out with a growl. Ugh! The office was closed in a twinkling, and the clerk, with the long ends of his white comforter dangling below his waist, for he boasted no gray coat like Scrooge, went down a slide on Cornhill Street at the end of the Lane of Boys 20 times in honor of its being Christmas Eve, and then ran home to Camden Town as hard as he could pelt to play at Blindman's Bluff. And we'll end the story there, and I'll continue it later.